Looking back on my years living in Scarborough, Ontario, a suburb just outside of Toronto, I am amazed by how little space my world actually occupied. Our neighborhood, my house, surrounding streets, my friends' houses, my school, and the immediate environs occupied a relatively small suburban grid of a much larger landscape. I think I first became aware of this on a visit to the Courtright Conservation Centre in Kleinburg, Ontario, just west and a little bit north of the city. If you're a film fan, and in particular a horror fan, you might recognize it from its appearance in David Cronenberg's 1979 shocker, The Brood.
When you come face to face with the Brood, you may think they're human. They're not. You may think they're harmless and easy to control. You're wrong. Don't let the Brood anywhere near you, or you'll know how it feels to be totally terrified. Once they get their hands on you, you're better off dead. The Brood. They're waiting for you. Rated R. Restricted.
Under 17 not admitted without parent.
One of the exhibits that was perennial at Courtright was a very large wall-sized satellite map of Toronto. Looking at that map and those suburbs, I was able to pinpoint my neighborhood, my street, right down to my actual house. I remember being both awestruck and a little humbled at just how small a place my house was compared to the surrounding areas. But I would shortly thereafter get a first-hand view of just how minuscule my world was when a work colleague of my dad's invited him and myself to take a flight in a small, privately owned Cessna out of Buttonville Airport just north of where we lived. We took flight, we flew over our neighborhood, I saw my house, street, everything from thousands of feet above. The journey did not end there either. We flew over Toronto, over Lake Ontario, all the way to Niagara Falls and back again. The Niagara Peninsula, the Queen Elizabeth Way, the Highway 401, the Don Valley Parkway, and Toronto itself was no larger than toy buildings in some miniature village somewhere. I think this was the big moment where I understood my place in the world at large. That my problems, as insurmountable as they often seemed to me, really did nothing to move the world beyond my understanding of it and the shaping of that reality. Toronto was then, as it is now, a multitude of neighborhoods stretched across the third largest urban landscape in all of North America. Streets and subdivisions and schools, grids of neighborhoods I would never visit, comprised of people, lives, and worlds I would never experience. Worlds just like mine. To think that all of my joys and sorrows, hopes and fears, and overall experiences were limited by where I lived and how far I could travel on my bicycle gave me an uncanny awareness of just how small I was in this world of ours. To venture south of my school, North Bridlewood Elementary, was to venture into a strange no-man's land of homes and streets leading southward, naturally, to South Bridlewood Public School. Here was a school that was almost a mirror image of my own. Here were houses built at the same time in the early 1970s where occasionally you'd see a house that looked identical to yours. Sometimes it was a reverse image, like a mirror of your own life. Who lived in those homes? What were their lives like? These were honestly questions this inquisitive 9-year-old pondered on leisurely bike rides through Scarborough Agincourt. The suburban experience I first detailed way back in the first full episode of this podcast dealing with Star Wars was very much a constant in my life now, 5 years later in the summer of 1982. Star Wars was 2 movies in, with the third film, then called Revenge of the Jedi, due for release that following summer of 1983. By this point, my interest in Star Wars was beginning to wane a bit, though. There was a new contender on the block, a new contender to the throne of my toy obsession, and his name was G.I. Joe.
He'll fight for freedom wherever there's trouble. G.I. Joe is there.
It's here, the G.I. Joe collection. Infantry Trooper. Codename Grunt. Bazooka Soldier. Codename Zap. Motor Soldier. Codename Short Fuse. Laser Rifle Trooper. Codename Flash. Ranger. Codename Stalker. Communications Officer. Codename Breaker. Machine Gunner. Codename Rock and Roll. Counterintelligence. Codename Scarlet. Commando. Codename Snake Eyes. Each sold separately. G.I. Joe from Hasbro.
But, to be fair, Star Wars was still far from dead. Like that parrot in Monty Python's famous sketch, it was either resting or pining for the fjords, or in this case, the Force. Kids my age were still obsessed with Star Wars, and to really get a sense of its cultural reach, especially in the suburban world, one need only study a small scene early in E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. Elliot, played by Henry Thomas, has faked having a fever in order to stay home from school. But what his mother Mary, played by Dee Wallace, brother Michael, Robert McNaughton, and sister Gertie, Drew Barrymore, do not know is that he's made a new friend. An extraterrestrial stranded on Earth. Like a hyperactive kid having a friend over for the first time, Elliot shows the alien his room, his games, his Pez candy, and especially his Star Wars toys. During the film's later Halloween sequence, E.T., hidden under a ghost sheet, sees a kid dressed as Yoda from The Empire Strikes Back and follows him, crooning, "Home, home." Clearly, E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial exists in a world where Star Wars also exists, making it, along with that galaxy far, far away, the suburban film of its age, and possibly of all ages. And if there's a filmmaker who is shaped by the suburbs and likewise defined their magic in the cinema of the 1980s more than any other, before or since, it can be none other than Steven Spielberg. And this is the story of E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. Steven Spielberg was, and I think remains, the ultimate suburban kid. Born in Cincinnati, living the first few years of his life in New Jersey before resettling with his family in Arizona, it was in those post-war subdivisions of Phoenix that Spielberg found his calling. You'll find no other filmmaker with a finger pressed as firmly to the pulse of what suburban and middle America wanted to see at the movies in the 1970s and 1980s than Spielberg. Maybe George Lucas. His early works, E.T., Close Encounters, and even Jaws, are a celebration and a testament to the ordinary people, the ones who treat their kids to dinner at McDonald's, who go to movies at the multiplex or drive-in, and have family bowling and goofy golf nights. The world of Spielberg, his films, but also the ones he would produce throughout the 1980s, is navigated by kids on bicycles roaming their small towns and suburbs. Back to the Future, The Goonies, Gremlins, even Explorers, which he did not produce, but has his fingerprints all over it. It's the same template the Duffer Brothers' Stranger Things emulates expertly, while leaning heavily on our shared nostalgia of the Spielberg era to thrive. But while the Duffers celebrate the popular culture in cinema of the 1980s, Spielberg's films were set within that reality, drawn from his experiences as a 50s and 60s kid. It must have been a glorious time in a young Spielberg's life. E.T.'s original title was, in fact, A Boy's Life, as it so perfectly encapsulates what growing up suburban was truly like. 40 years on from E.T., I don't think any movie ever since has so perfectly captured the fun and joy, but also the loneliness of suburban life. A loneliness it would take some time for me to experience myself.
Now, Universal Pictures proudly presents Steven Spielberg's newest film. A timeless story from the most original director of our time. He is afraid. He is totally alone. He is 3 million light years from home.
I'm sure everybody listening knows the story of E.T., so I'm not going to recount it. Its screenplay may have been written by Melissa Matheson, but its story's origins lie in Spielberg's own childhood. Loneliness lies at the heart of E.T., and if there is a defining moment of Spielberg's life, it surely was the divorce of his parents, dramatized in his 2022 film, The Fabelmans, that sent shockwaves through everything that followed. That trauma of family breakdown recurs through much of Spielberg's work, most so notably in this seemingly simple tale about a lonely boy befriended by an equally lonely alien. It's quite clear watching it as an adult what E.T. is really about, but for most 9-year-olds at the time, we wouldn't have picked up on it. The absentee, disinterested father is a figure we see throughout Spielberg's work, and the absent father is central to many of his films. We see it in Jaws' Chief Brody, leaving Amity Island to hunt the shark that's been menacing the community and nearly killed one of his children. We see it in Close Encounters' Roy Neary, abandoning his family to journey among the stars. We even see it in Minority Report's John Anderton, whose momentary distraction at a public pool leads to him losing his son forever. We certainly see it in Elliot's, Gertie's, and Michael's absentee father, vacationing in Mexico with his new girlfriend. E.T. is very much about that divorce, and the toll it took on Spielberg, and indeed the toll it takes on all children of divorce. It would take my parents' divorce just 10 years later for me to really see that. Until that moment in my life, though, E.T. had kind of been minor Spielberg for me. A great film, no doubt, but further down my list of favorite Spielberg movies. It has certainly moved up that list in the years since, but today watching E.T. as a child of divorce, now a parent himself, is a difficult and sometimes painful experience. Becoming a child of divorce at the ripe old age of 19 in my case, I was an adult and pretty much expected to be an adult and suck it up because life is hard and nobody likes a whiner. And frankly, that's what I did. I internalized my pain and my grief. I gave up on close friendships and relationships because what the divorce of my parents told me was that love was temporary and it was conditional, that the people you should have trusted without question would lie to you and deceive you and use you as a pawn in their never-ceasing court battles. It's said that being a writer is a lonely profession. In my case, I was already lonely well before I began down this road. As a result of that divorce, I avoided watching E.T. for a very long time afterwards. I might have fared better if I had, though, because watching it well after the dust had settled helped put a lot of my pain into context and heal some of it as well. E.T. was a smaller, much more intimate story, sandwiched between two Indiana Jones movies, and it was that intimacy and I think Spielberg's personal connection with the subject matter that essentially make it ground zero of Spielberg's work. The film you have to watch in order to understand all of the others. E.T. wants to go home, as desperately as Elliot wants to return to the home he once had. For while we can surmise he still lives in the same house as he did pre-divorce, it certainly doesn't feel like home. Post-divorce homes never do. He wants his mom and dad back together. He wants his dad's unnamed girlfriend out of the picture. He wants to return to a time where everything seemed normal and safe. And while E.T. does eventually return home, Elliot remains, changed by his experience, a little older and wiser, but still remaining in the shattered pieces of a still broken home. It was that ending that I think resonated the most with me post-divorce. That the pain would always be there. The pain of losing a friend, of losing the life you once knew and trusted. But it was a pain you could learn to live with and eventually overcome. I was one of millions who saw E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial in that legendary summer of 1982. A summer where the choices offered were frankly legendary and the likes of which we will probably never see again. Tron, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, The Road Warrior, Rocky III, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, First Blood, The Secret of Nim, Poltergeist, The Thing. To go to the movies at any point that summer meant you were pretty much guaranteed to see a certified classic. As for me, ironically, I saw E.T. at a small theater on Cape Cod in Massachusetts, just across the water from Martha's Vineyard, where Spielberg had filmed Jaws a mere 8 years prior. The other two movies playing at the cinema were Tobe Hooper's Poltergeist and John Carpenter's The Thing. I would have been happy with any of those, but this was a family vacation. My parents, my sister, my aunt and uncle, and some cousins. So the family-friendly option won out. And what a movie it was. Again, it feels pointless to summarize E.T. because it's become such a piece of our shared cultural memory. It became the biggest grossing movie of the year, of the decade, and of the century, until topped 10 or so years later by Spielberg's own Jurassic Park. I can't really summarize it. What I can do, though, is rattle off the moments that led to its success. The raw teenage banter, like It Was Nothing Like That, Penis Breath, the first haunting sight of E.T. emerging from the storage shed, E.T. pretending to be one of Gertie's stuffed animals, E.T. and Elliot staggering around drunk. There was that first bike ride through the sky, and Ash and E.T. reaching for Elliot's mother Mary, those terrifying men in spacesuits invading the home. There was E.T.'s death and rebirth, the exciting bike chase through suburbia, and that final flight into the sky with E.T.'s parting words, "I'll be right here," a promise to a happy but heartbroken Elliot. The heart of that final scene and of that movie, I think, is the bit that comes just before it, though, when Elliot is crying, like I think everybody in the audience was, and E.T. points to Elliot's tears and says, "Ouch." Elliot then points to his heart and says, "Ouch." It's that hurt that wounds Spielberg and We Divorced Children deepest. In saying goodbye to a friend you knew you would never see again, just like a child of divorce must say goodbye to the safe, happy life he's lived once and never will again. After a divorce, everything changes. Your home is no longer your home, and your family, in a way, is no longer the same family pre-divorce. E.T. is an avatar for all our hurts and all our joys, and that's why we responded to him, and we still do all these years later. E.T. played like gangbusters in Cape Cod, in Toronto, and all around the world. It was a funny, touching, exciting experience, but also one that left a lot of us suburban kids quite depressed after it was over. But returning to those homes and those neighborhoods, those worlds, was like coming down after spending a week at Disney World. The average, normal, mundane world of your neighborhood would not be visited by friendly aliens or even malevolent ghosts. You would return to your home, to your school, to essays and pop quizzes, to bullying and rejection. It made one almost ponder what happened to Elliot, Michael, Gertie, and Mary after the triumphant music swelled and we cut to the end credits. After the government and scientists concluded their investigations, after the cars and trucks and vans departed, after Elliot's home was out of quarantine. After the movie, we presume he went back to his old school and his old life, but how could he? How could you undergo a literally transformative experience and return to whatever normal was supposed to be? These were the questions I remember pondering quite frequently on the long drive from Cape Cod back home. It's what I pondered in the weeks of summer remaining. It's what I still ponder today. It goes without saying that E.T. was a blockbuster. It did what had been the unthinkable, which was to unseat Star Wars to become the top-grossing movie of all time. Where The Thing and Blade Runner flopped, E.T. soared. Where Star Trek II and Conan the Barbarian were hits, they weren't just as big a hit as E.T. In the years that followed, E.T. would be slammed as saccharine and simple, and simplistic in the face of those other genuine classics. But criticizing E.T. for what it was always meant to be misses why it was so successful. Despite its sci-fi trappings, it felt real. Blade Runner and The Thing and Star Trek, as great as they are, all feel like movies, be they the Los Angeles of 2019, an isolated research base in the Arctic, or the 23rd century. Their scale, scope, and artifice told us that this is a movie. E.T., however, was a portrait of a lonely young boy, lost after his parents' divorce, who finds someone just as lonely and just as lost. We all knew kids like Elliot. Many of us were that kid. I was nearly the age of Elliot when I saw E.T., off by just a couple of years. I could empathize with Elliot because he was as familiar as any of the kids I knew in my daily life. I also knew what it was like to be a frequently lonely child as well. Remember, when E.T. came out, we had just moved to Scarborough, Ontario. I was still the new kid. Of all his films, I think E.T. is the one closest to Spielberg. He has certainly the most affection for it. He refused to allow it to come to home video for the longest time, until relenting in 1988. He did release a 20th anniversary special edition with tweaks and changes, most notoriously replacing the shotguns the federal agents wheeled against E.T. and friends with walkie-talkies. But then he later admitted his mistake and went back to the preferred 1982 version. The logo for Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment is, of course, Elliot and E.T. riding that bicycle through the sky. You won't find that kind of connection between Spielberg and his other works, with the possible exception of Schindler's List, the film that won Spielberg the Oscar he should have won for E.T. I think Spielberg is a master of many things: composition and camera movement, long takes, nowhere near as showy as Martin Scorsese's, but so expertly choreographed between camera and actor that once you see it, you can't forget it. But he is a master of the image, and possibly the best, most romantic image in E.T. isn't even the most famous, that shot of E.T. and Elliot biking through the sky, silhouetted against a bloated full moon, the like of which you only really seem to see in the movies. It's at the beginning of the film, where the alien, still unidentified and still largely unseen, gazes from a hilltop down over that grid of glittering suburban lights, denoting the start of the valley below. For me, that, not Barry Kyler opening that door in Close Encounters, is the definitive Spielberg shot. The one that tells a story just by existing. We don't know E.T.'s thoughts, but we can identify them. It's a view Spielberg himself experienced many times, gazing out over the San Fernando Valley at nighttime from high up on Mulholland Drive. Viewing E.T. now, through the lens of the 21st century, is very much like glimpsing a life we once lived, but can no longer experience. I think E.T., like so many films of the 80s and 90s, works because it straddles that line between the analog and digital age. It's an analog story we watch in the midst of our digital world. It's a movie we watch now the way 80s kids could watch 1939's The Wizard of Oz on television, nearly as equidistant from the year 1982 as 1982 is from us now. The story of E.T. might work in a modern setting, but it would not be the same story. There would be doorbell cameras and smartphones to capture grainy images of an alien that get posted to YouTube for likes and shares. There would be viral videos, there would be surveillance drones and nightly helicopter sweeps. We can be accused of rose-colored glasses, looking back at an age that seems simpler to us, but in many ways 1982 was a simpler time compared to today. The story might still work, but it would be far less magical. The appeal of E.T. 40 years on is to look back at a time when the world felt smaller and larger at the same time. For us suburban kids, it was more than just a movie. It was a promise that adventure could be found in those boring cul-de-sacs and parks and tree-lined streets. It told us that while childhood could hurt, it frequently did, we could also survive it. It taught us divorce was not the end of the world, just a transitional period from the old to a new. That we would be okay as long as we had people, and sometimes extraterrestrials, we could call friends. Which brings us to the end of this episode of Celluloid Heroes. As always, you can follow me at my website, bradabraham.com, where I post show notes, video clips, and a lot more. And also at the LONGBOX CRUSADE's feeds across social media and various streaming platforms. I will be back next month with a bit of a time jump, a slight tonal shift, and a suave British secret agent named
Bond. James Bond.
I'll see you then.
And now, folks, it's time to say goodnight.
We sincerely appreciate your patronage and hope we've succeeded in bringing you an enjoyable evening of entertainment. Please drive home carefully and come back again soon. Good night.